Are you ready, kids?
Hello, it's Employee a Million, and welcome back to SpongeComs. I'm so excited. Today's episode is Season 2, Episode 13, or Episode 33 overall, which includes Shanghaied, which originally aired on Nickelodeon on March 9th, 2001, and Gary Takes a Bath, which was originally released on DVD on November 5th, 2002, before premiering on Nickelodeon on July 26th, 2003, making it one of the first in production order to premiere on DVD before television. Not that it has any bearing on its quality, but I am just so excited to get to Shanghai because personal favorite episode of the show. I've talked about it in my Best Season 2 video that I did way back when, and I'm just super happy with how it turned out, how it was one of the first real experiments Nickelodeon did on the show, and it just turned out so good. It's such a good episode. I love it. I love every little bit of it, including the weird, dorky, patchy segments. Funny thing about the patchy stuff is that when it was originally aired, it was called a You Wish Spectacular Special, and these little skits with Patchy were designed around calling in to get your ending on the air. You voted for whatever the ending may become. And when I was a kid growing up, well after this all happened, I was wondering why in this episode his house is filled with so many phones. Like, it's just one of those things. But, yeah. This whole thing with Patchy's pick and having to announce his favorite episode and then a letter that doesn't get opened. Nice callback to Christmas Who, but still. I feel like that was just all added in for the sake of making sure this hit the 15-16 minute mark, and just for connecting it back to its original airing when it had more extensive Patchy segments telling you to call in and then showing the endings that the kiddies didn't pick. That was a huge novelty when this episode premiered, that you could call in and get either SpongeBob, Patrick, or Squidward to get this wish at the end of the episode. A lot of people have already done videos discussing it, like Nintendo and Poparina, and they do raise the question of if it was rigged in some way. I mean, you can never tell with voting, but there have been clips overseas that show them using the other alternate endings, so very likely that it wasn't, and they were just incredibly lucky that they got the most elaborate ending. Poparina makes a very good point in that the ending that was picked was the most elaborate. It had the most jokes and the biggest set piece. So I guess they were just really banking on the popularity of the winning character and how it would affect the show. I don't know if the other endings were used overseas. I guess not at this point, but they are on DVD, and the special, as originally aired, is on a few early first 100 episodes DVDs. Mostly intact. They had to remove the phone number because it had been retired to J.V. Jones's locker. But otherwise, it's just weird that they've got this piece of history floating around on some DVDs, and kids can watch it, but they can't really pick the ending. I mean, they see all of them anyway, but they aren't big-time cartoon decision makers. This little bit doesn't make a whole lot of sense because SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward haven't really been on the Dutchman's ship yet. I mean, SpongeBob and Patrick did see it in ARG, I think. But otherwise, yeah, great to use Dutchy for a big special like this, since he was one of the more pronounced villains at this time, and they're really saving Plankton up. He isn't a super well-recurring character quite yet, but that is quickly going to change after this episode. And setting it on a pirate ship and making it this very intense misadventure where all of the characters' lives are at stake, they're eventually going to get eaten by the end, really does help sell a dramatic atmosphere and makes it feel like stakes are higher than they've been for most of the show. Aside from maybe SB129, but that's its own thing, and this is mostly within established rules of the SpongeBob universe. Well, lack of rules, no doubt. But, yeah, I think if you had to complain about this episode in some way, aside from the gimmick, if you think it's a gimmick, it is that a lot of the jokes go on really, really long just to get to that 15, 16-minute mark. And that I will not deny, because the bits with Squidward getting fried are different, have different jokes to them, but yeah. And also Patrick going lee to lee to lee. I think they just put that in so that they can have the thing scroll just to remind them that it's a voting thing. You'll know if you ever see the original airing, and funny thing about the original airing and how it was kind of rare after it premiered for a long time. Like with I Was a Teenage Gary and a lot of other older episodes that people hadn't seen the premieres of in a long, long time, rumors started to circulate that things were a little different in them, namely regarding this little fly of despair thing. But before I get into that, I have to say this is just insane and macabre and very un-SpongeBob-like, and it was designed by Zeus Service, who was getting into the show at this point, and it works. It really does work, but I think it worked a little too well on some younger kids because they remembered the imagery being a lot more disturbing, and I guess that's just imagination and all that. Some people think that some exchanges went a bit longer when they hadn't seen the episodes in a while. It's just those things that you pick up on, and maybe the Fly of Despair was just a little too much for some youngins. And again, Dutchman just really sells these scenes of SpongeBob and Patrick being total goofballs. I feel like SpongeBob's Springer Cheeks are starting to become very apparent, but it works from the perspective of Dutchman having these two goobers work for him, and they're kind of messing it up, making it harder for him, but he's a villain, so it's okay. And they were just kind of allowed to go to town with SpongeBob and Patrick being complete dopes. I mean, the thing with SpongeBob and Patrick in this episode is that Patrick is very dumb, very dim, not a whole lot going up in there except for maybe a toaster. But SpongeBob is the kind of SpongeBob that I really like to see. He's the kind of character that tries to be funny or at least super duper happy in any situation he's given. Just look at the smile on his face when he hears that it'll be grueling like daytime television. And speaking of the jokes, oh my gosh, they just knock it out of the park throughout the whole episode. Even the longer ones are good, like they're really fun. According to the commentary, a lot of the jokes in this episode were based on prior experiences of the writers. Like, for instance, the perfume department, which is usually used as a sign of a joke that couldn't get onto Rocko's Modern Life, but could get onto SpongeBob because it was allowed to be way more surreal by concept alone. It's a classic bish, and it's just very spontaneous, very out of nowhere, but it just is weird enough for you to stop and think and then get sucked into SpongeBob and Patrick's misadventure in there. And it was apparently based on writer C.H. Greenblatt's fear of perfume departments. Like, he couldn't walk through them for a very long time, and he kind of translated that phobia into SpongeBob and Patrick going through this weird misadventure that they apparently always go through. It's just classic. And it also doesn't get much more classic than, honestly, this really surprised me and made me feel happy. One of Steven Hillenburg's favorite jokes on the show. A friend of his, did this little magic trick that SpongeBob performs right here, and he just cracked up. He said it was the funniest thing he ever saw, and he was more than happy to let the people write it into the show, and that just makes me feel a little warm and giddy inside, that thing, yeah. And also a little joke later about SpongeBob and Patrick wondering if the Dutchman will give them movie passes or oversized coffee mugs was apparently based on prizes that Nickelodeon would give out to employees. They joked in the commentary that that was how Nickelodeon paid them rather than through money, and I just find that really funny. That being said, I haven't heard the commentary in a pretty long time because down here they don't have them on the DVDs. That kind of sucks, but what can you do? Commentaries aren't really heard a lot about these days because of, streaming and how it would be much harder to put them on there. And that's another joke that's just spontaneous and just really fits the mood that SpongeBob and Patrick feel. That little bit of the ice skating. Don't know how they got that whole scene in there, but it works. And the scene popping up about the Dutchman's magic sock, this MacGuffin that SpongeBob and Patrick have to get for themselves. It comes completely out of nowhere. Nowhere in Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost or Scaredy Pants or even Arg. Maybe Arg. Do they really bring up that he needs the sock to eat? Like he can't eat without it? But they do kind of make fun of it being a useless plot point by having the Dutchman flat out state it in his audio diary and then say that everyone knows he has to eat with it, even though only SpongeBob and Patrick have eavesdropped on it. I think he's talking about us, the audience there. I think he also talks about us when he brings up his otherworldly powers, which are just, for all intents and purposes, the kids voting. And another thing that really elevates the surrealism of this episode is that perfume department scene is all done in live action, and then and most of this episode is hand-drawn, of course digital ink and paint, but then the Fly of Despair is mostly digital media. Like, it makes the whole thing feel like this weird art experience, and again, this is something that the show would just take and run with when the second movie came out and after that, and it's great to see on the show again that they just do whatever the heck they want and can make a great story out of it with great jokes and great characters and great little moments. As I said, as a kid, I never knew that Shanghaied was this original special at the time. I just thought it was a really long and really funny episode. But otherwise, I had no idea what the deal was with Patchy's pick, and I had no idea why. Like, I thought that when I heard rumors of these original scenes, I thought they were just deleted scenes, but then as I got older, I guess later on, it just absorbed into me that people actually voted for this ending. I've yet to ever meet a person who voted or knew what it felt like, or if they had a return video call from it. Like, if they recorded what they heard on the phone. I'm really bad with phones. But yeah, if you were to take the order that Patchy lists them off in the 100 episodes release as the order from least voted to most voted, I'm happy that Squidward is the second most, because, I mean, even though Patchy doesn't want him to win at all, he did deserve it. SpongeBob and Patrick kind of wasted their first wishes. Patrick completely wastes his alternate wish on gum, and Squidward and SpongeBob kind of have their own ideas of strange ways to get out of the Dutchman's grips. SpongeBob wishes he's a vegetarian, but the cost of that is that they turn into fruit. And I really like the subversion of them returning home, but the pineapple is just a pineapple in a blender. And I like the idea of Squidward wishing that he'd never met SpongeBob, because by some measure that would mean he wouldn't be on this ship, but quite the opposite. He stays on the ship, but SpongeBob and Patrick have no idea who he is. They're all very strange endings. They don't exactly resolve things or get things back to normal. I like the misdirect of the SpongeBob thing. Like, it makes kids think that things have returned to normal, but instead, nope, they're even worse. They're in even more danger. Really love that. Now I've got this last little bit of Patchy's pick right here, and don't know really what to say about it. I think I've gotten everything I really want to say I love about Shanghaied out there, and I just feel really good about that. I seriously have to thank Aaron Springer, C.H. Greenblatt, and Meriwether Williams for writing this insanely funny episode, and kind of doing their best to do this thing in reruns. But it doesn't really affect my enjoyment of the episode. I still think that it's a really fun time, and it totally validates this being my favorite episode of the show. However, problem is, when this episode started to be considered for reruns, they had no idea what to do, because the episode would be automatically a lot shorter, but they didn't know how to fix that. So, near the end of Season 2, while some early Season 3 episodes were getting commissioned actually, they had to make this episode, Gary Takes a Bath. Aaron Springer, C.H. Greenblatt, and Meriwether Williams wrote this one as well, so it could sort of feel like Shanghaied. Doesn't really, but when in Rome. And ironically, even though this was meant to be paired with Shanghaied, which would have been a really popular episode had it aired in reruns over and over again, for some reason, probably mainly the suicide bombing joke, it did not air in 2001. I don't even think it aired on TV in 2002. They released it on the DVD C Stories in late 2002, but it or Shanghaied didn't air on Nickelodeon together until July 26, 2003. I'm happy that I finally got to an episode released after I was born, but yeah, kind of strange that they left them on the chopping block for that long, or left them on the shelf. But yeah, I think what people love most about this episode, and what I really get from its first two acts, is that it's very gag-heavy. It's just a bunch of really fun little vignettes, one after another. Doesn't really have a whole lot of story. SpongeBob just wants to give Gary a bath, but doesn't really have any success. And I think that this episode wouldn't have been quite as funny after they changed Gary's characterization, because at this point he's still just a house cat as a snail, and that just makes it a lot funnier to me personally. And there are a lot of very memorable but also kind of infamous jokes in this little short episode. I already talked about the suicide bombing one, but there's also the subliminal message of the weird, creepy cowgirl, which I didn't find creepy at all, but they apparently had to remove it in some countries because it just came completely out of nowhere and wouldn't have been a fun sight for kids. The joke with Mr. Krabs is also the first time they really get carried away with money's involved. Let's just get Mr. Krabs in there. Even though this is by all intents and purposes a bottle episode, SpongeBob and Gary are only really the only active participants in this plot, and Tom Kenny's the only voice actor in it, aside from a stock sound effect doing the laughing voice of the woman. And there's also the little bit of SpongeBob reaching for soap, calling them doubloons, saying don't drop them. And people have interpreted that as a joke about things people do in prison, and I really hate to think about that. I really hate to think that they got that kind of joke on SpongeBob and no one complained, but yeah, it's on there. I don't think they're removing it anytime soon, and yeah. But for the most part, I think that this is a really funny episode and a really fun way to just let loose and do as many gags as they could with this simple premise. I don't really know how to feel about this ending, though, where SpongeBob just goes completely mad with waterlogged power. I think the puns are a bit lame. I think SpongeBob's going a bit too far here, and I was a little unsatisfied with Gary winning in the end. SpongeBob getting dirty and needing a bath, and Gary not getting a bath. That always is kind of bothersome when your pet doesn't want a bath or a clean, and they just won't let it. They hate water. Especially Gary, who lives underwater. Who knew? But this is the first use of the music Lonely Hearts Club, which is one of my personal favorite pieces of music that they use for SpongeBob. I don't know why, it's just very nostalgic, really reminds me a lot of conversations and conflicts, and it just sounds really good. I know it's supposed to be this depressing thing, but yeah, nice listen when you're just trying to cool down. And again, about Gary winning in the end, I do appreciate it more as I get older, because really SpongeBob should not be treating his pet like that. Again, I don't know exactly how SpongeBob should be acting in this situation. I said this was produced near the end of Season 2, but his characterization is starting to get a little more Season 3-ish. A lot of people say that there isn't much of a difference between 2 and 3, but biggest one to me is SpongeBob's characterization, and I'll get to that when I get to that. And regardless of how I feel about this story, I do think that this is a very funny ending that kind of lets SpongeBob get his just desserts and Gary gets off scot-free. Plus, the image of Gary smiling at the end has become one of his most famous pieces of stock artwork, and I can't really argue with that. And that was my commentary on Shanghaied and Gary Takes a Bath. Sad thing for me is that I am never going to do a commentary on these episodes again, at least for a while. But my question of the week for you last week was, what is your favorite, sweetest ending in the show? And all of you had different answers, and I really like that. Jack McGinn, for him it's the ending of Squidward the Friendly Ghost. For Rebel Friend, it's Sweet Victory from Man Geeks. Super Seal, my man, agrees with me, Pizza Delivery. My question of the week for you this week is, what's your idea for an interactive special? I'm surprised that Nickelodeon didn't keep doing these with other shows year in, year out. I would have loved to see one of these for the Fairly Odd Parents, one of them for Jimmy Neutron, one of them for Danny Phantom. Probably not for Avatar, because that was probably supposed to completely be its own thing. And, fan interference and all that, maybe legal reasons. But I digress. Just the idea of voting to change a story, choose your own adventure, in a way, is a really cool idea, and it's very weird to me that Nickelodeon didn't take complete advantage of this aspect of their fan involvement. Like, they always had, Kids Pick the President, and You Pick Live, and all that, but never really changing the outcome of an episode, at least until El Tigre, which was the El Tigre finale in 2008, so they waited on this for 7 years, and I don't think they've done it since. But yeah, It's just a very strange novelty, and if you like the SpongeCom, I'm making this one public. Please check out the SpongeComs playlist for my commentaries on your favorite SpongeBob SquarePants episodes, one of which might be in another few weeks or another few days, when I get to the very emotional, very intense worlds of Welcome to the Chum Bucket and Frankendoodle. Goodbye for now.